thrilled to be in Moscow. This is an absolutely beautiful city. It's my first time in Russia, and I have to say that I'm totally blown away by the hospitality, by the food, by the wine, and especially by the beauty of this city. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So I hope that you all are going to enjoy this presentation and not walk away disheartened. Wine fraud is a problem, but we can fix it. What we have to do is work together. So let's learn a little bit about the issues. I don't know if this is the one that says photography prohibited, but it's not. My assistant's a little overzealous. So what is wine fraud? A lot of people think that wine fraud is wine counterfeiting, and counterfeiting is an important aspect of fraud, but it's only one aspect of wine fraud. So the first thing that we need to do is determine what is wine fraud. Wine fraud covers the gambit of stolen wine, ill-gotten wine, wine that's been damaged that's sold back into the market, investment scams, failure to deliver on goods that are purchased. All of these aspects, anything that's financial or criminal that is involved in wines and spirits comes together, and it is wine fraud. Now, of course, we at Shea Consulting, winefraud.com, and now the Shea Vault are most concerned with counterfeit wine of fine and rare wine. Theft is on the rise, and theft is a big problem. Theft is probably not a big problem in Russia, but it is already a big problem in the rest of Europe, and it's a huge problem in the United States. As you heard in the intro, I work very closely with the FBI. I've been working with them since 2008. And on a very regular basis with monthly meetings or at times bi-monthly meetings if we're working on very active cases. We're currently working on a very active case with about 120 different victims of theft. These are retailers, they are wineries, in a few cases they are restaurants. Because wine has gotten so valuable and because our markets are so opaque, the crooks have figured out that one of the best things to do, rather than having to make the counterfeit, is to steal the real thing and flip it. So wine theft is on the rise. It's on the rise from retailers, from storage facilities, from restaurants, from hotels, and from private collectors. So it's hitting everywhere. Wine is also stolen sometimes in transit, and therefore during the supply chain. So theft is a big problem. And those wines are obviously resold pretty easily, high demand. One of the things that the internet does do is that it allows us to go shopping. It allows the crooks to go shopping in advance. They can see exactly what wines a restaurant has or a retailer might have. And in many of the cases where these crimes have been solved, we have found that the thieves actually have a pick list. So they are sent in with a list of wines to go and steal. So the internet's great, but it really gives a lot of credence to fraud. Other aspects of wine fraud include investment scams. In Europe, they have a much bigger problem with people calling pensioners, people calling old people and saying, oh, you should invest all your money in wine. And they lose all their money and that disappears. It's less of a problem in the United States. I don't know if it's an issue for you all, probably not yet. Future scams, this is where retailers sell futures that they never purchase, as in the case of Premier Cru, which was a retailer in the San Francisco Bay Area. By the time Premier Cru went bankrupt, they owed their clients about $80 million in wine that they never delivered. He also spent a couple $1 million on Tinder, much to his wife's chagrin. And then just misrepresentations of all kind. I don't think this is my updated version. We shall see. Other issues of wine fraud include, and this is where a lot of the counterfeits come into play, unlicensed vendors. So these are vendors who literally do not have a license to sell wine. Sometimes they're criminals like this guy. Oops. That guy is a major wine retailer in the United States of America, but he's also a convicted pedophile. In 48 of the 50 states, you cannot be in the wine industry if you are a convicted pedophile. Didn't stop him. He's got a huge business. So it's really a problem that these guys not only can get in and be part of the business, but they can make millions and millions of dollars doing it. There are vendors that don't exist. So the question about Wine Searcher, what do you do if a vendor is a fraudster? In our experience, it's more likely that those kind of vendors will sell on places like eBay or Craigslist or non-Wine Searcher type sites, because Wine Searcher actually does police the vendors that list there, whereas a lot of these other sites don't. And then there is a huge problem of vendors that are the fraudsters themselves, legitimate vendors, like Acker Merrill Condit in New York City, that actively participate in the fraud. The issue of damaged wine, Katerina, I need somebody from Simple Congress. This is not my presentation. This is an old version of it. Bueller. Can somebody help me from Simple Congress? Okay, thank you. Sorry, guys. Because my pictures are so much more fun than what's on this. Oh. I'm foiled. Who set this up? John Capon? Is Rudy here? Right? Yeah, it's no joke. I have to take bodyguards to some wine tastings. I've actually been assaulted. Those guys mean business. And I'm not exactly a tiny thing, like. It's huge money. Well, okay. I'm going to keep going a bit, but I'm hoping that we can catch up and put my real presentation, even if you want to connect to my computer, although it'll be in English. That's a problem. In the United States, we have had a number of serious fires and hurricanes and things like that have damaged wine. Unfortunately, one of the things that often happens when wine is damaged is that a salvage company will buy it. They will then resell it. Now, the first person that they sell it to knows that the wine is damaged, but the wine is then purchased typically by brokers who go out and resell the wine as though it's not damaged. The other thing that they do is they sell it to other markets like Russia. So I would be very aware of fine and rare wine in the next couple of maybe year and a half or so that might have suffered from heat damage or from water damage that's coming out of these cellars from hurricanes and fires. No? All right. Well, I'll keep going. So then we have counterfeit wine. The counterfeiters have gotten pretty smart. So did you see what that was? Has everybody seen the glass embossed with a Petrus before? So Petrus in the punt has embossing that reads Petrus. Whoops. And counterfeiters have now started putting in plastic inlays that make it look like the embossed glass. This is how progressed the current counterfeits are. It's a little bit scary. So fine and rare wine is really what I deal with the most. Totally. There are different types of counterfeits. When it comes to counterfeit wine, we deal with IP infringement, intellectual property infringement, adulteration, and of course, misrepresentation of a different kind. So IP infringement is what you see in all of these Asian crazy bottles like Romanée Candy or Pacour instead of Petrus, Penfolds instead of Penfolds. This is IP infringement. They know that it's not exactly the thing that they were trying to make, but they do it with impunity anyway, and they make a lot of money. Adulteration includes scandals like the 1985 scandal in Austria, where diethylene glycol was added to make wine sweeter. People got sick there, and it's very famous, and it actually ended up making the wines of Austria a much higher quality than they had been before. But what people don't know is that in 1986, there was also a wine scandal in Italy. And in that scandal, 24 people died, and 100 people were hospitalized. So the moral of that story is that wine fraud, because of it with adulteration, can be very deadly. So it's not just a victimless crime, as many people think, where nobody gets hurt. People can actually die from this. And a lot of people actually recently have died from counterfeit alcohol. So, market impact, everybody wants to know how much counterfeit wine is out there. This first statistic is from Globe Newswire in January of 2019. So the worldwide market in US dollars is about $304 billion. Fine and rare wine, as we define it, is wine that is traded in the secondary market, accounts for about 5% of that. So that's about $15.2 billion a year. Bordeaux represents 60% of the secondary market. It did in 2018, which is a little bit down. Well, it's way down since 2008. And Burgundy has climbed from 2% to 15%. Those two statistics come from Decanter Magazine in May of 2019. There is an estimated sales growth range for fine wine of 48% in 2019. So sales were flat in 18. They're expecting for fine wine sales to come back up. We are asked all the time how much wine is actually counterfeit. It's very hard to say. I did not come up with the 20% number. A lot of people think that I did, but I actually didn't. So this is the Telegraph, way before anybody asked me. And they're saying that 20% of all wine in the world is counterfeit. That includes all types of counterfeits. That includes IP infringement, that includes adulteration, that includes fine counterfeit wines. So out of $304 billion worldwide market, you're looking at about $60 billion worth of total counterfeits globally. That is not a small number. In the market today, we can calculate that there's still about $550 million worth of Rudy's wine left. That's astounding. I found a bunch of it last week. We are finding it all over the globe, all the time. It gets returned to vendors, and then the vendors will pay a victim back if they return the bottles. The vendors then turn around and resell those bottles. So these wines are getting circulated over and over and over again. And there's nothing that we can do about it. It's really frustrating. I am very sorry, but I'm not quite sure what that says. Yes. Can you? All right. Solutions, hooray. Okay, so while they're fixing that, we can talk fun fraud. People always ask me, well, let me address something. Going back to the wine searcher thing, the internet is absolutely a source of fraud, but the internet is also something that gives transparency. So if there's a vendor out there that is selling counterfeit wine, we can see them and we can call them out, and that's a beautiful thing. And that's one of the results of a wine searcher that isn't often talked about, and it's very important, obviously, to us. One of the ways that we monitor some of the wine fraud that goes on in the world is through social media. It's fantastic. People are so proud to be putting all their baller wines up that we actually catch them in the act of selling and promoting and being cool guys about their counterfeit wines. So the next time you see somebody on Instagram drinking nothing but impossible wines, you can probably guess that the FBI and I are looking at them. It's been a very interesting and long road getting here. We will, as soon as we get this going, we'll get to Rudy a little bit, but some of the things that I wasn't probably going to include. So I first found Rudy trying to sell counterfeit wines in 2002. And he presented me with a box of wines that was impossible, because I knew him. I had known him at that point for 2 years. He was 24 years old, and he was trying to sell Lafleur and Petrus that were Vandermeulen bottled from the 40s and 50s. Now, 18 months before, he had started by buying Palmer Merlot. Every wine collector follows a particular trajectory, just like people. So people will start off and they'll crawl, and then they'll walk, and they'll fall a little bit, and they'll stumble, and then eventually they'll ride a big wheel, and then a tricycle, and then a bicycle, and then maybe they'll learn how to drive a car, and then maybe someday they'll be able to afford a super fantastic, like, Lamborghini, right? Well, Rudy went from crawling to Lambo in a year. So when he presented me this box of wine, I said, there's no way. How could you possibly come up with these wines? And I'll finish that story when we get there. So Chinese IP infringements these can be really funny to us. Although I do have to say that it is impressive because I don't speak Chinese, and if I were trying to read a Chinese label, I would probably have a really hard time telling the difference between Romanée Candy and Romanée Conti, or Pacours and Petrus. But this is a very good example of IP infringement. Actually, let me go. Oh no, I'm on the wrong one. So, adulteration, IP. That's a picture I wanted to show you. Isn't that amazing? The Napa Valley on fire. It's very scary. So, we talked about these. You saw this, but I'll show it to you again. I think this is fascinating. Counterfeiters have come so far. It is truly frightening how good they've become. So, worldwide market. Wine fraud is not just targeted at rich white people. That is a total misnomer. That's what people in the United States say. People in the United States say two things to me. Who cares? The only victims are rich white people. And the other thing that people say to me is, oh, you just keep talking about wine fraud because you're trying to build your brand. Neither of those things are true. I wish that I didn't have to talk about wine fraud, which is why I've created a new solution. But the fact is that wine fraud does exist, and it doesn't help that we don't admit it. Wine fraud has been around for as long as wine has been around. As soon as something is commoditized, as soon as it has value, somebody is going to counterfeit it. So all the way back in 70 AD, Pliny the Elder wrote about how his friends were such idiots that they didn't realize that the Falernia that they were waxing and waning poetic about was actually a counterfeit version of the wine. And aren't they stupid because they don't know any better? So this is not a new thing. And in fact, the first law against wine fraud was passed in 1737 by King Louis the Beloved. The producers of the Côte de Rhône were very annoyed by the fact that so much Côte de Rhône wine was being sold in the cafes in Paris that there's no way that all of that wine was real, because it was more than the total production. So King Louis the Beloved passed an edict that all barrels coming from the Côte de Rhône had to be stamped CDR. So this wine fraud thing is not new, and it's not going away. One of the interesting things about wine fraud is the information that we can use to figure out how counterfeiters get things wrong. For example, a lot of people think that the 1936 appellation laws in France cover all of the appellations. Well, that's not true, Because if you look up here, you can see that in 1936, a number of appellations were created, but it wasn't until the 1970s, actually 1970, that Pouligny-Montrachet, Chassagne-Montrachet, those became appellations. So this is one of the ways that we caught Rudy. It's called information. And you can see that, it's important to understand history and understand the laws that are around it in order to understand if wine is real or not. So, for example, here you have a 1929, and there's no appellation control A on it. And then you have a 1945, and now there is an appellation control A. Rudy got that wrong a lot. So again, here we have a bottle of Bon Mar. This is an evidence bottle from the trial. And Chambon-Musigny was not an AVA until, an AOC until 1936. Here it is in 1923. And that's one of many things wrong with that bottle. And it's not just France, and it's not just Burgundy, and it's not just Bordeaux. And that's important to recognize that all the different countries of the world who are quality producers have different laws, and they have different rules. There are certain areas where you can't have a screw cap. You'd be amazed how much screw top Domaine de la Romanée-Conti you can find in Asia. It's all over the place. So understanding these kinds of laws can be very, very important. So how did we get here? How did we get to the fact that we've got billions of dollars floating around our markets, more being made every day on this wine fraud stuff? There are a number of different factors. Globalization, the fact that we are a tiny, tiny world. Computers definitely help. The internet has changed the game, and the way in which people purchase wine have all had huge effects. So computers, the internet, and globalization, these allow access to information not only for consumers, but also for fraudsters. They allow fraudsters to buy all the different pieces of material that they might need to create a new bottle, and they can do so anonymously. They don't have to walk into a store and be on a camera. You can order everything delivered straight to you. The internet gives the fraudsters access to markets and access to victims. And again, all of this can be done behind a computer screen with complete anonymity. The changing attitude towards purchasing fine wine. Historically, there was a relationship between a merchant and an individual. And that was a long-term relationship. And the merchant was like a mentor, and the merchant helped the consumer understand wine, and they might start with Village Burgundy, and someday they would get to the Grand Crus of Burgundy. Well, today, everybody's an instant expert because they can get online and they can read a couple of reviews, and they can see which wine is the most expensive. If they can afford it, they can go out and buy it. So people no longer take that slow trek to understanding wine. They jump straight into Montrachet. And that obviously can be a problem both for consumers and for vendors, because you have consumers that don't really know what they're doing, but then you also have vendors who've been educated the exact same way, and they really don't belong selling the kinds of wines that they do. Self-proclaimed experts, whether they are the consumers or the vendors, harm the industry. Many critics and journalists knew exactly what was happening. Some of them were actually involved. Jancis Robinson has apologized for taking money to support one of Rudy Kurniawan's auctions. She came out loud and strong very early about it. A lot of other people have kept their mouths shut, which is amazing to me. The problem is that a lot of these journalists, they didn't ask the questions. Nobody asked why in 2006, when Rudy Kurniawan sold $34 million worth of wine at the age of 29, where the hell did he get that? Where did it come from? Because 3 years before, he didn't claim to be a big wine collector. He never said that it was his family's wine. Why did nobody ask for receipts? A 29-year-old cannot walk into an auction house with that much jewelry and be able to sell it without proving that they owned it. We live in a totally opaque wine world, and that invites fraud. When the journalists do not protect us, by calling out the fraud, they are complicit. And they did not do us any favors in this situation, and most of them still haven't. Most of them still have their mouths shut and their eyes closed, and they're still hanging out with the bad guys. Eric Greenberg, Rudy Kurniawan, John Capon. These guys should not be given money. So it's really unfortunate that the press didn't help us out. One of the reasons that wine fraud continues to prevail is that a lot of people believe that it's not a real problem or that it's not my problem. The result of this mentality has become very dangerous because fraud continues to be pervasive, and it's actually spread from only the high end and only the low end through the entire middle tier. We're now seeing fraud at all levels of the markets. This malaise, this laissez-faire attitude has allowed us to create an industry whereby vendors have no oversight. Vendors who knowingly sell counterfeits and or sell counterfeits habitually have no accountability. There's very little really fierce prosecutions going on globally. So crooks have looked at this and they've seen, you know, by God, people are making so much money off of this, and even when they get caught, they are barely given a slap on the wrist. So, people will take advantage of it. People have realized that wine fraud is big business, and it's good business to be in. If you get caught trafficking human beings or drugs, you're going to jail. If you get caught trafficking fine counterfeit wine, you're going to get laughed at. Probably get invited to a party. So a couple of the biggest counterfeiters in the world. Meinhard Gorka, Hardy Rodenstock, as we know him. Hardy just passed away, having never spent a day in jail. Hardy was a German music promoter, turned wine expert, turned finder of all the most amazing wines in the world. He is the man behind the Jefferson bottles. And again, he just passed away having never spent a day in jail. So Hardy is what we could consider the old guard along with Rudy. Khalid Ruabach. This one is amazing because a lot of people still don't even know about this. If you ever see these labels, they're counterfeit. So Khalid Ruabach, for the turn of the century, made who knows how much counterfeit Lafite, Margaux, and Latour. And he started selling it at different auctions and selling it all over the world. Well, Paul Pontillier went to one of these auctions. He went to a Taijan auction, and he said, hang on a minute, that wine is not real. And he pulled a couple hundred bottles out of that sale, and for the first time ever, they used cesium-137 testing. He took the bottles to University of Bordeaux, and they tested them, and they found out that, in fact, they were not the right year. We are still seeing these bottles circulated in the markets. Khalid, of course, he got a couple months in jail. Now he's out, he's back in business. And then we have Rudy Kurniawan, whose real name is Zhen Wang Wang. I can't pronounce that. Rudy was incredibly prolific. Hardy Rodenstock was fairly prolific. Rudy was amazingly prolific. He made Burgundy, he made Bordeaux, he made the Rhone, he made Champagne, he made white wine, he made red wine. He made it all. He was methodical and organized and very well funded. And unfortunately, he was supported by journalists, by critics, and by vendors. On winefraud.com, you will find all of these notebooks. This is all evidence that we looked at. These are all evidence pieces that were seized from his home. These are all of his to-do lists. Not only does he have to-do lists, he also has lists. This list over here of every bottle that he made and who he sold it to by serial number. It's amazing. So people say he was not organized. The guy was organized. These are all the different cork stamps. One of the things that Rudy did differently, Hardy Rodenstock actually had stamps branded. Rudy made stamps he ink stamped them. So this is one of the ways that we find his bottles. Here again is some of that information. So here that you can see that he has Latosh 78 6-liter. And those are the different serial numbers and who he sold them to. He sold number 5 at Christie's. He sold number 19 to John Capon. It's absolutely stunning to look through this evidence. One of the things that Rudy did is that he was a bit overly consistent. So here you have many decades of Vogüé Musigny, and you can see that a lot of the labels have the same inconsistencies over and over again because they come from the same exact computer templates. So this is something that I think is also astounding. These are Rudy's post-sale advice reports from the seller and the seller 2. So together, over $38 million worth of wine was sold. You can see that he got loans from people. People loaned him millions of dollars at a time through an auction house. Totally weird. At the end of the seller 2, selling $38 million, he owed Acker Merrill $15,000. How does that happen? He had a negative balance at the end of that sale. Totally stunning. And we like to think that Rudy was very green because he decided to recycle before it was cool. So here's Rudy recycling some Martinelli Pinot Noir and turning it into 1940s/50s DRC. And he's recycling some Duckhorn Merlot into 1940s/50s Pomerol/Graves. So this is actually, again, these are pictures of bottles that were taken from Rudy's home that show his. We have other bottles with formulas on them and all sorts of fun things. And if you haven't seen it, there's a movie on Netflix called Sour Grapes that's quite interesting, and a book called In Vino Duplicitas about the Rudy story. Now, the new guard of counterfeiters is doing something totally different. They are making modern wine. So the first big one, and I'm surprised, a couple people I've mentioned this guy to, you haven't heard of him. So Alex Anakin, whose legal name is Alexander Ayugov, a Russian, was making counterfeit Romane Conti for years with Ezio and Nicola Luca in Italy. He was recently arrested, well, about a year and a half ago. He got time served and a €150,000 fine. That's not much of a fine if you're making Romane Conti for a couple years. So again, high reward, very low risk. And then of course we recently had the Tignanello people that were arrested. So one of the things that we're seeing on current counterfeits is that they're no longer making old and rare wine, they're making recent release rare wine. And the truly scary thing is that we even have counterfeit anti-fraud. So they have started to digitally print the cosmetic anti-fraud that the producers are putting on. And that's a little bit scary. So this is some 2009 Bon Mar from Vogüé that I found just last week. And you can tell the difference between the authentic ink and the counterfeit ink, I hope. If not, you need glasses. So here's a question. Can you tell the difference? We're going to go through 2 different bottles here. One of them is real and one of them is fake. Could you tell those apart? If I was in a restaurant and somebody served me one of those bottles, I would not know which one was real. They are so close. The one on the right is right. The one on the left is wrong. This is how good modern counterfeits are getting. Not a problem. Okay. As I said, my voice is pretty damn loud. I don't know if I need this thing. And this one is great. So Geneva, or not just Geneva, Switzerland has always been a pretty good quagmire of counterfeit wines. This is the very first lot of a very important auction for this auction house. First bottle, first lot is supposed to be 1978 Romane Conti. Here's a couple problems. Romane Conti doesn't use tax capsules. Number 2, Romane Conti embossed their glass like that 1 year. That was 1980. So very first bottle, very first lot in the catalog, totally counterfeit. You cannot be both an expert and make mistakes like that. So what do counterfeiters do? There are 3 main things that counterfeiters do when we're talking about fine and rare wine. They refill bottles, they recreate bottles that are legitimate, and they make what we call unicorns. Why do we call them unicorns? Because they're mythological. They don't exist. They exist only in the mind of the person who created the bottle and the person who was victim enough to buy it. So here's a fun one. There was a group called the White Club out of Denmark, and they charged people like 20,000 euros to be a member and then another 10,000 euros to go to a dinner. And they were refilling bottles and doing the same bottles over and over again. So they served this, by the way, counterfeit bottle of 1937 Romane Conti in December of 2012 and again in April of 2013. Once again, how do we know this? Social media. Everybody loves to post the pictures. Same problem. So they did this over and over and over and over again. And then there's a picture of this woman sitting in between like 150 bottles, and we've been able to find about 75 of them that she's served multiple times. Jim Nguyen, the FBI agent who raided Rudy Kurniawan's home, put all these pieces together to show how Rudy would make a bottle of 1945 Romane Conti. So there's all the different pieces and then the finished product. So refill, this is how you recreate. And then of course we have unicorns. Was it ever created? Is it correct for the vintage? These 1900 Lafite, B&G Lafittes were never made by B&G. This Clos Saint-Denis is totally the wrong vintage. The first vintage that Ponceau made Clos Saint-Denis was 1982. And that is a 3-liter bottle of 1945 Romane Conti, never made. So how do we determine, authenticators, how do we determine what is real and what is not without opening the bottle? That's the trick. Can't open the bottle. You can't be an art authenticator by cutting apart the art. So physical inspection is necessary. We cannot trust photographs to authenticate a bottle. You need to physically inspect the bottle. We compare that with known authentic examples. We compare it with known production standards of the time, of the region, of the era. We check it out with known legal requirements. There are certain legal requirements because wine is at the end of the day food, and food packaging carries a lot of laws. So it's very important that the wine match the laws of the time. And we can compare with other known counterfeit examples. But the reality is, as a wine authenticator, there are very, very many times when there is no definitive answer. When you really can't say in either direction. I can say I would be comfortable selling that, or I would not be comfortable selling that. But there are so many anomalies when it comes to production, especially older production, that it's just not possible that as an authenticator, you can come down with a decision every single time that something is real or something is fake. So what is necessary to be a good authenticator? You have to have a very good eye for detail. You have to have very strong pattern recognition. You have to have a lot of patience for both sitting with a bottle and inspecting it. There are bottles that I have literally inspected for hours at a time, but also for dealing with irate victims, because that's not very fun. You have to have strong wine knowledge. You have to know your regions. You have to know your appellations. You have to know your laws. When did things become AOCs? What type of bottle are they allowed to use? What type of closure are they allowed to use? How long are corks supposed to be in that year? So not only wine knowledge, but knowledge of wine history and knowledge of regional history. How likely is it that at the end of World War II, a Bordeaux producer would have run a batch of large format labels when they were only going to make 10 or 12 large formats? The more likely, the more logical thing is that they're going to use a small label on a big bottle. So you have to figure in a lot of history to that wine knowledge. You have to have a strong knowledge of your own market. What are the laws in your own market? What are the expectations? Who imported when at what time? And you have to have intellectual honesty. You have to be honest enough to say, I don't know. I can't tell. I can't make a call on this one. Or to be able to say, I'm really sorry, but this is totally inconsistent with known production standards. And then the guy's going to come back to you and say, yeah, but I know Henri Jaillet, and he gave it to me from my son's bar mitzvah. And I said, well, that's wonderful. You should drink it, but you can't sell it because it doesn't have a label. So you have to be intellectually honest. You have to have integrity, and you have to have a lot of courage. As I said, I've had to take bodyguards to a lot of tastings, unfortunately, because I have been physically assaulted. And it is big business, and there are a lot of people that don't want to hear this. They don't want to face the reality. So if you're going to be able to say something is not okay, be ready to stand by it. So the 16 points of authentication that we use, I'm only going to go over a couple of these, and it's interesting because I put provenance first, because provenance is key. But when we are inspecting, provenance is last, because provenance cannot determine authenticity or fraud, but provenance can support authenticity or fraud. So even though it's number one up here, when I am inspecting wine, I intentionally, and in fact I tell my clients, I do not want to know from where this wine is coming until after I have made my physical inspection, because I don't want my own mind to be tainted. If I know that it comes from Acromeral Condit in a certain time period, I'm gonna be prejudiced in one direction. And as an authenticator, it's not my job to be prejudiced, it's my job to let the bottle talk to me and to tell me what it is that it is saying. I shouldn't be speaking to the bottle needs to be speaking to me. So some of the things that we look at include paper. Paper has changed over time. There have been chemical treatments that have happened to paper, and you have to know in what year these chemicals became regularly used in things like paper production. So here we have some Romane Conti from 42, 43, and 40, I don't know, another 40s. And then in between we have two 1928 Bordeaux. Under a UV light, you can see that the Romane Contis shine like they're at a disco, right? It's like chicka, chicka, chicka. And the Bordeaux do not. That's because those Romane Contis were made after 1967, and everything about them was problematic anyway. But so paper is one of the things that we look at, not only the type of paper, but also the chemical composition of the paper. We look at ink and print. And ink and print can tell us a whole lot. The colors, the characteristics, the way that the ink permeates or sits on top of the paper, and the quality can tell us whether something is authentic or counterfeit. It can tell us when the print was done. It can tell us the method of print, and it can often show if there has been false aging applied to the paper or not. So again, we have authentic ink, and then we have counterfeit. Ones like this are a gift. I mean, you see that under a microscope, you're like, job done. Give me a beer, right? Can anybody tell me what label that is? It's Latour. So scary. Like, you know how a lot of people you learn what the wine is by the top of the capsule? I can tell what the wine is by the ink. It's so psycho. Okay, so again, we have authentic and counterfeit examples. And you can see that they can be very close, but the paper will be different. It will be, obviously, a lot of times it'll be falsely aged, and the print method is typically incorrect. So we have authentic ink and counterfeit ink. Corks tell us a whole lot. So corks are kind of the soul of the bottle. There's a lot that you can do to fake the rest of the bottle. Corks can be very, very difficult to fake. Most corks are branded, so they're burned, they're not printed. Most producers don't use blank corks. Most fine wine producers have branded corks. There, again, are exceptions, especially in Burgundy. But for the most part, blank corks are a problem. Actually, the way that the stamp can read, whether it's vertical or horizontal, can change from vintage to vintage. Counterfeiters can get that wrong. And then, of course, they can pull a cork out, change the vintage, maybe add 100 years to it. This was a 1994 cork that somebody turned into an 1894 cork. We had fun with that at Lafite. Consistency is a big issue. There are some things that are physically impossible. How is it physically, where in the law of physics does liquid jump like that? And then you have things that are overly consistent. So here you have a span of like 60 years of Yachem, and if you were to lay all of those labels on top of each other, they would have the same exact nick. Most counterfeiters, well, Hardy Rodenstock and Rudy, those are probably Hardy Rodenstock. Actually, all of those are probably Hardy Rodenstock bottles. They always falsely age their labels before putting them on. They bake them in the oven, they iron them, they do all sorts of crazy stuff. So they do the nicks and the tears prior to putting them on the bottle. So they probably literally had those in a stack and nicked them up and then put them on. Now, the other big question is it logical? Is the bottle consistent with authentic production, with the rest of the bottle, with the rest of the bottles in the lot? Is it consistent with reasonable expectations? There's your buddy Leo holding an iPhone. The man died in 1910. Would it be logical if you saw a picture of him holding an iPhone? Probably not. A lot of times these counterfeits that we see are, to me, as ridiculous as Mr. Tolstoy holding an iPhone. Here are some great shots of consistency. Here's Rudy with a big collector. And this also kind of epitomizes to me everything that was wrong about the culture that surrounded Rudy. This is supposed to be a 1945 Romane Conti. If this is real, it's like a $150,000 bottle. And they're drinking it out of a fucking beer stein. Like, have some respect, right? But I went through and I looked at all the different imperfections on that label. And then I looked at all of the computer evidence that was seized from Rudy Kurniawan. When you compare the two, you can find the same exact imperfections on the bottle that the man is holding as you find in the computer template. That is a kind of consistency that makes me very happy, because I can positively say this bottle was made from that computer template. So fighting back against fraud, every single member of the trade, I think, has a duty to be part of the solution. We have to acknowledge the problem internally. You have to realize, yeah, it's a problem. Yeah, come to grips with it. Find your peace. Give it to God. Acknowledge it, and then acknowledge the issue to your colleagues. Make sure that you all are aware of the problem and that you're not saying it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem. It's all of your problems. Wine fraud affects all of us because it hurts our market, it causes prices to go up, it causes producers to be untrustworthy, it hurts all of us. So be aware of it and be honest about it. Then recognize the good actors. Give your money to people who are not fraudsters. Avoid bad sources, and definitely don't give your money to people who and firms and merchants who have a history of selling fraudulent wine. There is no such thing as a counterfeit that doesn't come with a counterfeit tale of provenance. So people are going to bullshit you. They are going to make up stories. After 15 years of me screaming off into a vacuous black hole about the issue of wine fraud and counterfeit wine, I am very happy to say that my team and I have finally developed something by which we no longer have to focus on the counterfeits. We can now celebrate authentic wine. We have developed this thing called the Shea Vault. Over the last 20 years, I've had just about everybody in the world who's interested in wine fraud come to me with their solutions on how they're going to fix the problems. And every single one of those has been flawed. Right now, most producers use cosmetic solutions, and those cosmetic solutions can either A, help to substantiate a refilled fake, B, they don't help anything because all that they're doing is having this secretive cosmetic solution that even the vendors don't know to look for. Or C, they're using something like a proof tag that could be 3D printed, especially in emerging markets, to substantiate fraud. The other problem with all of these things is that you have to be in direct proximity to the bottle. I have to be this close to tap a bottle to see if it's authentic. The vast majority of fine and rare wine is not purchased with this proximity to a bottle. So how do you figure all this out? How do we come up with a solution that is layered? Because anything that's a single layer can be undone. That's immutable. How do we make sure that it can't be corrupted? That's timeless. If it's authenticated once, and I sell it to you, and you sell it to this young lady over here, every single time right now, that bottle needs to be re-authenticated. I want it to be authenticated once at the producer, and then it's authenticated forever. It needs to be proof of both authenticity and provenance. Authenticity without good provenance is just as bad as counterfeit. And it needs to be independent. The people who are saying whether the bottle is authentic or not cannot have a monetary interest in the sale. Finally, consumer empowering. So we have been able to come up with this solution using blockchain security. The ledgers can be made available, and all of this can be secured through transactions. There are 3 ways that bottles get into the vault. They are certified at the time of production on the production line. A chip goes in underneath the capsule, securing the cork against Coravan emptying and refilling. Or bottles of provable direct provenance from reputable licensed vendors like a BB&R, Berry Brothers and Rudd, who have proof of direct provenance through paperwork, can verify those bottles by inputting that paperwork into the blockchain. And then third, we have a TCM, the Shea method authenticator, who can authenticate bottles in the secondary market, apply a secondary market caplet, it's an over caplet, and certify the bottles that way. So the RFID inlay goes in at the time of production. That gets read. The information goes into our software system, and then at the very end, this blockchain secured ledger of authenticity and provenance comes out. We just inputted about $3.5 million worth of wine that we're going to sell through Zacky's on December 7th. It's going to be the commercial release of this Shea Vault. They're all secondary market bottles. That's what it looks like. And in the Zacky's catalog, every single bottle will have a URL to its own ledger of authenticity and provenance. So you're going to be able to go online and see where the guy who's selling the bottle bought it, and when, and how long ago. And my name and my signature are going to be on that ledger because I'm responsible. If that bottle has any problems, it's my butt. I'm taking responsibility for it. We currently have over 20 authenticators all over the world who are ready to deploy this. We're looking for more authenticators, but we have people in America, in South America, in Europe, in China, in Australia. So we're trying to hit the globe. We're really trying to be consumer empowering and to help the good vendors out there. This is just what the interface looks like. I'm really, really excited because we're just launching this now. I feel like I have never had children. This is my baby. Welcome. And this is what the ledger of authenticity and provenance looks like. So you can see there's an actual picture of the actual bottle, the individual bottle. It is not a stock photo. There is a condition report that has to be redone every 5 years. Now this ledger is only made available for viewing if the bottle is available for sale. If the bottle is not available for sale, it's like your own seller tracker account. So you can only, it only becomes important when a purchase is inevitable. And the owner can encrypt their name or they can be public. But the purchase information can never be encrypted. So if you're going to sell a bottle forward, the information about the sale will move forward. But the individual owners don't have to ever come into the public. They can always remain anonymous. The other fun thing is that whoever the company is, so that's the Shea, that's my symbol down on the bottom left there. The company that is inputting the bottle can put in their logo as a hyperlink so that people can always, everybody wants the consumer interaction. So we're giving them that. But the idea being that rather than trusting a vendor who's telling you, trust me, I've been buying from this guy for years, the bottle is okay. I don't want to trust. Trust has gotten us into a load of problems in this industry. I want to verify. I want data. I want data that somebody has to stand behind. This is data that we're going to stand behind. It empowers the buyers from anywhere in the world. You don't have to be in proximity. And hopefully, we think that it's going to increase the value of bottles because bottles that are provably authentic with provable provenance are going to be worth more than bottles that are, who knows what, gamble wine. Thank you very much.
Морин, спасибо вам большое. Please. Так как мы, просим у всех прощения, немножечко с презентацией запозднились, поэтому сейчас не будет много вопросов из зала. You hear me? Но, правда, я перед тем, как Морин выступила, хотел рассказать маленькую историю и сказать, что вот мы, значит, в каком-то смысле коллеги, потому что буквально в прошлом году российская таможня пригласили меня и еще экспертов Российской ассоциации сомелье. Они конфисковали партию вина дорогого, Сосикая, Арнелая, Массетто, Кристаль, конечно же, и пригласили нас для того, чтобы определить подлинность. Но после вашего выступления я понял, что я хотел сказать, что мне повезло чуть меньше, потому что они были подлинные. Но после вашего выступления я понял, что это не точно. Теперь я понимаю, что это не точно, и возможно, что эти бутылки, они, правда, некоторые бутылки мы все равно использовали сканер для того, чтобы выяснить их, и это действительно часть работает, возможно, в том числе в этом ваша заслуга, но мы не пропустили, значит, ненадежные бутылки на российский рынок.
Браво.
Thank you. Что ж, давайте так, 2 вопроса, если есть. Давайте вот отсюда. Мы давно не использовали программу нашу замечательную. Значит, вот очень хороший вопрос. Какой самый сложный признак подделки, который можно заметить в анализе?
The one I don't know, the one I can't see. Right? So the most difficult thing that we're seeing today is the fact that most historically quality wine producers used plate press printing. In the last decade, in order to try to fight fraud, producers have turned to digital printing so that they can print on the anti-fraud, the invisible ink and all that stuff. Well, unfortunately, digital printers only cost about $500,000, and if you're making Romane Conti, $500,000 is not a big investment. So one of the biggest problems that we're seeing now is that the visual, the cosmetic anti-fraud is being counterfeited, and that's scary.
Еще один прекрасный вопрос, значит, тоже от девушки, от Анастасии. Были ли подделки, которые привели вас в восхищение? Если продолжить, учитывая ваш опыт, могли бы вы идеально подделать этикетку и вино? Я не знаю, может быть, сейчас поступит какое-то предложение и здесь. Хотя мы всех проводили через регистрацию, поэтому если что, вашим друзьям из ФБР мы все контакты передадим, можете не сомневаться.
What was the question, though?
Вопрос был в том, могли бы вы идеально подделать этикетку и вино?
Totally. Of course I could. I could make great counterfeits. You would all be screwed.
Великолепный вопрос. Великолепная Морин. Вчера, когда мы познакомились, я просто был очарован ее обаянием и шармом, конечно же. Поэтому вам большое спасибо. Друзья, давайте еще вопросик какой-нибудь такой. Или предложение, так скажем, может быть.
Добрый день. Спасибо вам большое, во-первых, за то, что вы делаете для всего винного мира. Можно вас назвать Жанной Дарк этого мира. Вопрос такой.
Only because of my youth, I think, right?
Да. Вопрос такой про Петрюс. Надеюсь, что вы хорошо знакомы с этим вином. И в прошлом году в Москву попало несколько бутылок довольно подозрительных даже на первый взгляд, потому что за них предлагали слишком невысокие цены. И одним из таких признаков, который также вызвал подозрение, это то, что вино 80-х годов, тем не менее, этикетки выглядели очень хорошо, но что еще больше вызвало подозрение, то, что на них не было указания на процент содержания алкоголя. Является ли это, как вы считаете, является ли это одним из признаков поддельного вина?
Не было содержания алкоголя указано.
Depends on the original market for which the bottle was made. So this is why it's important to know not only your own market, but other markets in the world, because a producer like Petrus will have several different labels for one vintage. And there will be, there'll be a label that Chateau and Estates does and Diageo does. There'll be a label here and a label there. Depending on the market for which the bottle is packaged, and depending on the vintage, it may or may not state the alcohol. As I said, we just put $3.5 million, about 2,000 bottles, into the Shea Vault, and we noticed bottles of Petrus from the 80s that did not have alcohol on the main label. It was only on the import strip label. So the interesting thing is that it's when you're authenticating wine, it's not about one gotcha moment. It's about a number of red flags that build up. Sometimes there is a gotcha moment. I mean, when Chateau is spelled wrong on the cork, you've probably got a problem. But a lot of times there's, something like that would be a red flag. And then I'd keep looking and I'd keep looking. And when you have a preponderance of red flags, then you maybe need to cut the capsule and look at the cork because you've got an issue. But it could just be an anomaly of production. So, it's never that simple, unfortunately.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое за вопросы. Ну, давайте еще, земляку Морин в качестве... Можно без микрофона. Без микрофона не слышно, как выясняется.
In 2000, I started working in wine auctions in New York City. Auctions only started in New York in 1998. Every state is different in the United States. And in the state of New York, we didn't start wine auctions until 98. So I started kind of at the beginning of the wine auction business. And I happen to have strong wine knowledge, a very good eye, strong pattern recognition. And when you're putting up cases of wine at a time, and one looks a little bit different, or the bottle's a little too short, the first time I found a counterfeit Petrus, I reached to the back of a table to pick it up, and I almost threw it to the ceiling because the glass was too light. Just the sheer muscle memory of how much that bottle was supposed to weigh. So I got really good at this authentication thing, and I didn't have anybody to teach me. And I thought it was kind of interesting that there were these fake wines. So I started learning about it, and I went to the Met, and I met somebody who was an expert in paper and how paper ages. And I went and talked to people who were printers, and I have cousins who are glass blowers, and they taught me all about glass. And I just got really good at it, and then in 2002, I caught Rudy trying to sell counterfeit wine. And then later on that year, I found Eric Greenberg selling counterfeit wine through Acker Merrill Condit. And Acker Merrill Condit, who John Capon had been a good friend of mine, he was actually my first friend in New York. Isn't that sad? I realized, wait a minute, these guys are crooks. This is actually going on. Hang on, we've got a problem. And then nobody listened to me, and I was like, this is a problem. I don't know if it's all the nuns that I had in school growing up or what, but I knew that something was wrong, and I just said, this is bullshit. I'm going to follow it. And it just got bigger, and it got bigger, and it got bigger. And I was the only one saying, there's a problem. And then I think it was just a sense of just grit and determination, fuck you guys, I'm going to get you. And it took a long time, but we're chipping away, and it's happening. So I didn't choose this, but I'm really good at it, and I'm trying to teach as many people as I can to be good at it, and trying to create a better, healthier industry for all of us.
Спасибо большое. Спасибо большое, Морин. Спасибо большое, Морин. Спасибо огромное за это интереснейшее выступление. И, в общем, мне хочется в завершении, наверное, сказать, что вот мы, Simple, Российская ассоциация сомелье, с этими мошенниками тоже как-то не очень. Поэтому, если вдруг у вас придет запрос на аутентификацию российского вина какого-то, мы подберем вам специалистов, у нас есть профессионалы, поможем. Так что будем вам всячески помогать.
Send them my way. Let's work together.
Спасибо большое, друзья. Это была Морин Дауни. Это было великолепное выступление. Thank you very much. Thank you. It was great.